There is a certain silence that grows inside a person who keeps loving someone who cannot or will not love them back. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is the kind of silence that settles in the chest like evening fog. Soft, invisible, but heavy enough to change the way a heart beats. You start noticing that your tenderness echoes, that every message feels like it is being sent into a room without windows, that your longing has become a monologue you keep performing in the hope that one day they might finally turn toward you, but they don't. And the ache of that becomes its own kind of psychology, a quiet, confusing darkness you learn to carry alone. It begins quietly, not with heartbreak, and not with rejection, but with a subtle shift inside you, the kind you only notice when you slow down long enough to feel the difference between what you're giving and what you're receiving. There is a moment, almost invisible, when you realize that your heart is moving toward someone who is not moving toward you, and yet you keep going, not out of desperation, but out of hope, a soft, trembling hope that maybe they just need time. Maybe they're guarded. Maybe they're still learning how to love. You create explanations because the alternative is too painful to accept. At first, you don't call it unrequited love. You call it timing. You call it patience. You call it loyalty. You tell yourself that some people are slow to open and that you simply need to wait for the part of them that will someday turn toward you. You don't yet realize that you are waiting for someone who is not walking toward you at all. They are simply standing still, and you are the one shrinking the distance between you over and over again. There is a softness in your early longing, the way you replay small moments, a glance, a half smile, a message that could be interpreted a dozen different ways. You look for meaning in crumbs because even crumbs feel like hope when your heart wants someone enough. Your body responds before your mind does. The small rush of warmth when they appear, the quiet anxiety when they pull away, the way your breath adjusts itself around their presence, like it has learned a rhythm that doesn't belong to you. In this beginning stage, projection becomes the painter of your emotions. You don't love them as they are. You love the possibility of who they might be. You fall in love with potential, imagining a version of them who would eventually choose you. This imagined version grows clearer than the real person because the real person remains distant, inconsistent, or emotionally absent. But the imagined one, they stay alive in your mind, giving you the illusion that this story still has a chance. Somewhere inside you, a small voice tries to speak. It whispers quietly that something feels unbalanced, that your efforts are becoming heavier while their responses remain light and effortless. But you silence this voice, not out of ignorance, but out of fear. The truth feels too sharp to touch. Acknowledging that someone doesn't love you back is not simply sad. It threatens your entire emotional investment. It forces you to see that your tenderness is becoming a one-way current. So you cling to micro moments, a laugh they shared with you, the time they didn't ignore your message immediately, the vague, hopeful gestures that mean everything to you and almost nothing to them. You collect these tiny fragments and assemble them into a feeling that feels close to love, even if it's mostly created by your own longing. The recognition of unreturned love is rarely sudden. It is gradual. It is slow. It is the accumulation of hundreds of small disappointments that don't look like disappointments until you add them together. It's the moment you notice that your messages are paragraphs while theirs are sentences, that you remember everything they say while they forget the details you share, that your heart waits for them, but theirs has never once waited for you. Eventually, you begin to sense the truth, not through words but through absence, the absence of effort, the absence of initiation, the absence of emotional presence. And yet, you stay. Not because you don't see the truth, but because you hope the truth might someday change. This is the first wound of unreturned love. Knowing it isn't real, but wanting it to be real so deeply that you keep your hands open long after they've stopped reaching back. This is where the darkness begins, not in the heartbreak, but in the recognition that the love you feel is yours alone to carry. Before a person ever loves someone who cannot love them back, something inside them has already learned the shape of longing. This kind of love does not begin in adulthood. It begins in the quiet corners of childhood, long before they even knew what love was supposed to feel like. Children don't decide what kind of affection they will chase later in life. They inherit that blueprint from the people who raised them, from the environment that taught them which forms of love are available and which forms must be earned. Some children grow up in homes where affection is inconsistent. One day warm, the next day distant. A hug followed by silence, a smile followed by withdrawal. The child learns early that love comes in unpredictable waves, and that their job is to adapt, to wait, to adjust themselves constantly in the hope that the warmth returns. And that kind of waiting becomes familiar, not comfortable, but deeply familiar. So familiar that later in life, when they meet someone emotionally unavailable, something inside them recognizes the pattern not as danger, but as home. Others grow up becoming emotional caretakers long before adulthood. Maybe a parent was overwhelmed, fragile, or consumed by their own wounds. Maybe the child learned to be the listener, the helper, the one who stays quiet so things don't get worse. In these homes, the child becomes responsible for emotional stability they never created. They learn to earn affection by being needed, not by being loved. And that lesson sinks deep, so deep that as adults, they gravitate toward people who require their emotional labor, mistaking exhaustion for connection. There are also children who grow up invisible in their own homes, not harmed, not abused, just unnoticed. Their achievements, their feelings, their quiet heartbreaks, all passing through the household like faint echoes. These children learn a dangerous idea, that love is something you must not only earn, but amplify. That you must be softer, kinder, more patient, more giving, because maybe then someone will finally look at you. So when they meet someone who gives them very little, they don't walk away. Instead, they try harder, because they learned early that trying harder is the only way they might be seen. Psychology calls these patterns attachment templates, unconscious blueprints that guide who you choose, why you stay, and how you love. But to the person living inside the pattern, it simply feels like fate, like they are drawn to certain people without understanding that what they are drawn to is not love, but familiarity. Emotional unavailability can feel intoxicating to someone whose nervous system was shaped by unpredictability. The push-pull dynamic ignites both anxiety and hope, mimicking the emotional landscape of childhood. And then there is the deeper wound, the belief that their worth is tied to their ability to endure disappointment, endure silence, endure waiting. Some children learn to measure their value not by how loved they are, but by how much they can tolerate. And so they grow up to love people who do not choose them, because choosing themselves was never something they were taught how to do. When a child grows up without consistent emotional safety, they learn to romanticize intensity over stability. The nervous system becomes wired for longing, not receiving. And longing becomes addictive. A familiar ache, a familiar pursuit, a familiar story in which they are always the one trying, hoping, proving, waiting. So when they fall for someone who cannot reciprocate, it doesn't feel wrong at first. It feels like returning to a script they've memorized, a script written long before adulthood, a script that tells them, if you love hard enough, they will eventually love you back. But children who grew up chasing affection never learned one crucial truth: love is not earned by suffering. Yet they enter adulthood trying to earn it anyway, holding on to people who mirror the emotional distance they once survived. This is where the pattern begins, and where the heartbreak becomes predictable. Because the child who once waited becomes the adult who cannot stop waiting. To understand why someone keeps loving a person who cannot love them back, you have to look beneath the emotion and into the machinery of the mind, the small invisible systems that shape desire, attachment, and longing without the person ever realizing it. Unrequited love is not simply a feeling, it is a psychological loop, a cycle that the brain, the nervous system, and old emotional patterns work together to sustain, even when the heart quietly knows the truth. It begins with intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful behavioral patterns known in psychology. When affection, attention, or validation comes unpredictably, one day warm, one day cold, the brain becomes hooked. The unpredictability intensifies desire. The highs feel higher because the lows are so low, and the nervous system starts chasing the next maybe. Maybe they'll reply. Maybe they'll choose you today. Maybe this time the effort will be returned. It is not love that becomes addictive. It is the uncertainty. This uncertainty activates dopamine loops in the brain. Dopamine doesn't reward satisfaction. It rewards anticipation, which means the moments before connection feel more intense than the connection itself. When someone gives you crumbs, a short reply, a brief smile, a delayed message, it creates a spike of dopamine disproportionate to the actual moment. This chemical rush makes the unavailable person seem more emotionally significant than they actually are. It isn't because they are extraordinary, it's because the longing magnifies them. Then comes idealization, the mind's attempt to fill the gaps. When someone is inconsistent, you begin imagining the version of them you want them to be. You fall in love with a future that hasn't happened, with potential that hasn't been expressed, with moments that feel bigger than they truly were. This imagined version becomes a psychological anchor, convincing you that staying attached is logical, even when the reality is painful. The mind also forms what psychologists call a fantasy bond, a sense of emotional closeness built on hope rather than actual intimacy. You believe you understand them deeply. You believe they feel something too. You believe your connection is unique. But these beliefs are shaped by projection, by your emotional needs, not their emotional investment. The fantasy bond gives you a sense of security while keeping you attached to someone who isn't truly present. There is also the nervous system's tendency to confuse emotional tension with emotional depth. When someone is unavailable, every small interaction feels intense. A delayed message feels like rejection. A small gesture feels like love. The emotional swings create an illusion of passion, tricking your body into believing the connection is profound when it is actually unstable. And then comes psychological repetition, the unconscious desire to recreate unresolved emotional dynamics from childhood. If your early experiences taught you to chase affection, you will chase it again. If your childhood taught you that love is inconsistent, you will find inconsistency familiar. If you learned to prove your worth through suffering, you will repeat that story with heartbreaking precision. This repetition is not intentional. It is a survival pattern. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace, because familiar pain feels safe in its predictability, even when it hurts. Loving the unavailable becomes a reenactment of old wounds, a way of unconsciously trying to change the ending of a story that began long ago. The tragedy is that the more the unavailable person pulls away, the more your attachment intensifies. Not because they are right for you, but because the nervous system is trying to resolve unfinished emotional business. Unrequited love is not weak. It is not foolish. It is psychological gravity, a force shaped by chemistry, memory, longing, and invisible wounds. And once you understand the psychology, you begin to see that the ache was never about them. It was about the parts of you still waiting for something you were never given. There comes a point in every unreturned love where the battle stops being about the other person and becomes a quiet war inside your own chest. A war between what you feel and what you know. Between the version of them you've created and the version of them that stands in front of you. Between the part of you that still hopes and the part of you that's already tired. This inner conflict does not explode. It drains. It pulls you apart slowly, like threads loosening from fabric. You wake up one day and realize that the longing has turned into a constant background noise. You're not even chasing love anymore. You're managing the ache of not having it. There is a moment you begin to notice the imbalance more sharply. You notice how much effort you are putting in just to feel seen. You notice how often you wait, how often you rehearse conversations in your mind, imagining the response you wish they would give. How often you minimize your needs so you don't appear too much. How often you give them the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt is all you have left. Hope becomes a habit, not because the situation gives you reasons to believe, but because hope feels safer than admitting the truth. You hold on to the smallest gestures, letting them bloom into meaning. A delayed reply becomes proof of care. A half-hearted compliment becomes evidence of possibility. A shared moment becomes a story you retell to yourself to soften the silence that follows. But beneath hope, another feeling grows quietly: shame. Shame for wanting too deeply. Shame for loving someone who does not love you. Shame for continuing to try, even when your efforts echo into emptiness. You start asking yourself questions you don't want to answer. Why am I doing this? Why am I not enough? What is wrong with me that they don't choose me? This shame doesn't come from their rejection. It comes from the betrayal you feel toward yourself, because part of you knows you deserve more, yet you cannot walk away. The conflict becomes a storm, tenderness pulling you forward, reality pulling you back, and your self-worth caught in the middle. There is also fear, deep, quiet, irrational fear. Fear that if you let go of this attachment, you may never feel this strongly for anyone else again. Fear that this person, even in their emotional distance, is the closest you will ever come to love. Fear that maybe you are the kind of person who will always care more than they are cared for. Fear that your heart, once fully released, will have no one left to cling to. So you stay suspended between wanting and withdrawing. You convince yourself to wait a little longer, to give a little more, to prove a little harder. Not because they asked you to, but because the fear of losing the fantasy feels heavier than the pain of living in it. But the conflict always reaches a breaking point, not loudly, not dramatically, just subtly. It happens in an ordinary moment, the 3 a.m. silence when your message isn't answered, the canceled plan that shouldn't hurt but does, the moment they forget something that mattered deeply to you, the way their indifference feels sharper than any argument. These moments accumulate until something inside you cracks, not the hopeful part, but the illusion. You suddenly see the emotional truth your heart avoided. You realize the waiting has become a kind of self-erasure. You realize you've been choosing them at the cost of choosing yourself. You realize that your longing, once beautiful, has become a quiet form of self-abandonment. And yet, even in this breaking, there is no anger, only exhaustion, only a kind of emotional fatigue that whispers, "You can't keep doing this to yourself." The inner conflict doesn't end because you stop loving them. It ends because your mind, your body, and your heart finally align in one simple truth. This connection is hurting you more than it's holding you. The turning point in unreturned love is not a moment people witness from the outside. It doesn't look like a dramatic goodbye, or a final message, or a tearful confession. It happens quietly, often without words. It happens inside you, long before you ever admit it out loud. It begins as a small shift, a gentle weakening of the emotional thread that once tied you so tightly to them. No one sees it, sometimes not even you, until the shift grows into something undeniable. It usually starts in a moment that looks insignificant, a delayed reply that doesn't sting the way it used to, a cancellation that feels expected instead of heartbreaking, a conversation where you suddenly realize you are talking more to fill the silence than to connect. It's not that the pain disappears, it's that the pain stops surprising you. There is a strange kind of clarity that appears when your heart grows tired enough. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Tired of waiting, tired of hoping, tired of giving softness to someone who cannot hold it. This tiredness becomes a soft mirror, reflecting back the truth you avoided for so long, not with cruelty, but with calm honesty. You begin to see the difference between love and attachment, between effort and endurance, between being chosen and being convenient. You start recognizing that the story you built in your mind is not the story unfolding in front of you. And this realization, though painful, carries its own quiet strength. The turning point is not a moment of empowerment. It's a moment of acceptance. Acceptance that you cannot change someone's heart by offering yours. Acceptance that their indifference is not a puzzle for you to solve. Acceptance that wanting someone deeply does not obligate them to want you back. You begin noticing the small truths you once ignored. The emotional imbalance, the one-sided effort, the absence of reciprocity disguised as mixed signals, the way your heart leaps toward them while theirs barely stirs. These truths are not new. They were always there, but now you finally allow yourself to look at them without decorating them with hope. Strangely, the moment of clarity doesn't feel like release at first. It feels like grief, because you're not just losing the person, you're losing the version of yourself that believed the story could work. You're letting go of the fantasies, the imagined futures, the tender illusions you once clung to in the dark. The heartbreak is not from them leaving. It is from finally admitting they were never truly there. But inside this grief is the beginning of something soft, something honest, something like emotional truth, returning to your body after being stretched too thin. The turning point is when your heart whispers, "This is hurting me," and for the first time, you listen. Not with resistance, not with excuses, but with stillness. You stop trying to interpret mixed signals. You stop hoping that one day they will wake up with clarity. You stop rehearsing conversations in your mind. You stop making yourself smaller just to keep them close. And without announcing it, without telling anyone, you start letting go. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in slow, subtle ways that reshape your inner world. You stop checking your phone so often. You stop waiting for moments that never arrive. You stop imagining scenarios where they finally choose you. It feels strange at first, like walking away from a familiar ache. But there comes a morning, quiet and unremarkable, when you realize you've gone hours without thinking about them. And that realization feels like the softest kind of freedom. The turning point is quiet, but it is real. It is the moment you stop fighting for someone who would not fight for you. And even though it is painful, it is also the first step toward coming back to yourself. Healing from unreturned love is not a single moment of closure. It is a slow unfolding, a quiet reorientation of the heart that happens gradually, almost imperceptibly. After you pass the turning point, something inside you begins to rearrange itself. The world doesn't immediately feel lighter. Your heart doesn't instantly feel free. Instead, the first stage of healing feels like standing in a room where the noise has finally stopped. There is silence where longing once lived, and in that silence, you begin to hear yourself again. The process of integrating this experience is not about forgetting the person. It's about remembering yourself, your needs, your emotional truth, your worth. There is a gentle reclamation that begins, almost like calling your own name in a room you haven't entered for a long time. Your attention begins to return to places it once left. You start noticing parts of you that went quiet while you were busy chasing someone who couldn't meet you. It isn't empowerment, it's rediscovery. You begin relearning what healthy emotional presence feels like. Not intensity, not unpredictability, not longing disguised as connection, but steadiness, reciprocity, ease. The nervous system, once addicted to emotional highs and lows, slowly adjusts to a softer rhythm. It takes time. Emotional safety can feel uncomfortable at first. Consistency may feel unfamiliar. Genuine care may feel suspicious. When you've lived in the volatility of unreturned love, stability can feel empty, even though it is exactly what you deserve. Healing begins when you allow yourself to explore this unfamiliar calm without running back to the chaos that once resembled love. A deeper layer of integration involves confronting the beliefs you carried into this attachment. Beliefs about your worth. Beliefs about what you must endure to be chosen. Beliefs that formed long before this person ever entered your life. You begin to see that loving someone who cannot love you back didn't mean your heart was wrong. It meant your blueprint was old. It meant you were operating from emotional instincts shaped by wounds, not by worth. Once that becomes clear, the story shifts from self-blame to self-understanding. The question stops being, why wasn't I enough for them? And becomes, why did I believe this was the love I deserved? Integration is not about rejecting the past version of you. It is about compassionately understanding that version, the version who tried, who hoped, who stayed, not because they were weak, but because they were repeating what they once learned to call love. There is a quiet beauty in this phase. You begin honoring your emotional needs. You begin setting boundaries not as walls, but as clarity. You begin recognizing when someone is giving you crumbs, because you now know what the hunger of longing feels like too intimately to accept it. Again, slowly, your heart gains a new language. Not the language of chasing, but the language of receiving. Receiving care without asking for it. Receiving attention without earning it. Receiving affection without shrinking yourself to deserve it. You also start noticing people differently. You see those who look at you with genuine warmth, those who listen, those who show up, those who offer steadiness instead of confusion. You may not fall for them immediately. The heart learns slowly, but you begin recognizing what it feels like to be emotionally valued, not just emotionally attached. Integration is the part of the journey where you stop calling longing love, where you stop confusing intensity with intimacy, where you stop mistaking suffering for devotion. You begin choosing connections that feel peaceful, not painful. And for the first time in a long time, you start understanding that love is not something you chase. It is something you meet halfway. The dark side of loving someone who didn't love you back turns into something softer here. Not a wound, but a teacher. It taught you what hurts, so you can recognize what heals. It showed you where you abandon yourself, so you can learn how to stay with yourself. And slowly, gently, quietly, you begin to open your heart again. Not to someone who cannot love you, but to someone who does. In the end, the story of loving someone who never loved you back does not remain a story about them. It becomes a story about you, your heart, your patterns, your quiet courage, your hunger for connection, and the places inside you that once mistook loneliness for devotion. Unreturned love does not end with a dramatic goodbye. It dissolves slowly, gently, like the last glow of twilight fading into night. What remains is not absence, but clarity, a quiet awareness of where you once were and who you quietly became while trying to hold on to what was never yours. There is a kind of beauty in this pain, not the romantic kind, not the tragic kind, but the truthful kind, the kind that reveals who you are beneath the longing. Because while loving someone who didn't love you back broke something inside you, it also illuminated something. The depth of your capacity to feel, to hope, to give. It showed that your heart is not cold, not closed, not incapable. It is simply tender in a world that sometimes rewards the opposite. You begin to understand that the ache you carried was not a flaw. It was a sign of life, of wanting connection so deeply that you were willing to endure the silence that followed your reach. Your love was not wasted, even if it was not returned. It was a reflection of who you were at that time, someone trying to rewrite an old wound with new hope. The closure does not come from them choosing you. It comes from you choosing truth, choosing to no longer participate in a story that asked you to shrink, choosing to walk away from an emotional mirror that only showed you half of yourself, choosing to stop building homes in people who only ever offered you empty rooms. And as the emotional dust settles, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel a soft neutrality where longing once lived. The person who once held the power to shake your entire world now exists in your memory with the gentleness of a lesson, not the weight of a loss. You see them clearly, not as the idealized figure you once protected, but as a human being with limitations you can finally accept. There is no resentment, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. Understanding that not everyone has the capacity to meet you where you love. Understanding that not every connection is meant to be mutual. Understanding that sometimes love teaches not by staying, but by leaving you with a deeper awareness of what you truly need. This awareness becomes a compass. It points you toward gentler connections, toward people whose hearts do not require decoding, toward relationships where emotional presence is not a reward, but a natural rhythm. You begin noticing how peaceful it feels to be understood without explaining yourself, how steady a person becomes when you do not have to chase them, how nourishing it is to be chosen without effort. The darkness of unreturned love becomes the soil for a different kind of growth, a growth that teaches you the quiet art of choosing yourself, of listening to your emotional truth instead of your emotional hunger, of honoring the signals your body whispers when it feels unseen, of acknowledging that your heart is not a weakness. It is a compass that was once pointed in the wrong direction. Eventually, you realize something tender. You were never hard to love. You were just loving someone who wasn't capable of meeting you. And their inability was never a measurement of your worth. So you carry forward, not with regret, but with soft wisdom, with the understanding that love is not meant to be begged for, bargained for, or survived. It is meant to be shared. It is meant to feel like safety, not sacrifice. It is meant to expand you, not erase you. And one day, quietly, you will give your heart to someone who meets it without hesitation. No confusion, no longing, no uneven ground. Just two hearts turning toward each other with the kind of openness you once believed you had to earn. And when that moment comes, you will look back at the person you once loved in silence and feel no darkness, only recognition that they were the doorway, not the destination.